In the summer of 1987, identical twin boys vanished from Mirror Lake Camp without a trace. No witnesses, no answers. For 30 years, their disappearance haunted a small town, until a single mysterious postcard reignited the search for the truth. What really happened to Brandon and Bradley Cole that stormy night? Before we dive in, hit subscribe, because the secrets buried beneath Mirror Lake are about to surface. And as you watch, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? Mirror Lake, New Hampshire, July 13th, 1987. The air was so thick with the scent of pine and wet earth that it almost masked the metallic taste of storm on the wind. It was the kind of night where sound carried differently, muffled and sharpened all at once, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Past the dim glow of the campfire, Mirror Lake stretched out black and wide, reflecting nothing but a thin blade of moon. The cabins, arranged in a crooked horseshoe along the shore, had long since gone dark, but one window in cabin 7 glowed faintly behind warped mosquito screens. Inside, 2 boys, identical in everything but the scar above Bradley's eyebrow, lay side by side, whispering beneath a single flashlight. Their faces hovered just above the patchwork quilt, close enough to touch. Brandon's hand was shaking as he unrolled the old map he'd copied from the counselor's supply shed. "If we go now," he whispered, "nobody will notice. We'll be back before anyone wakes up." Bradley grinned, fearless as always. "You said you wanted to do something legendary." "I do." Brandon's voice was barely a breath. "But if Mom finds out..." "She won't." Bradley bumped his shoulder, a silent dare. "Unless you chicken out." Somewhere outside, a distant peal of thunder rolled over the water. Both boys stilled, listening for footsteps, for the snap of a twig, for the metallic rattle of keys that meant the counselors were making rounds. There was only the rain starting up again, soft at first, then steady, then pouring. The flashlight clicked off. The twins crept from their bunks, careful not to wake the others. In the small, stale space between sleep and storm, they slipped out the window and into the hush of the trees. The camp's gravel paths squelched under their sneakers. They didn't speak, didn't dare, until they reached the boathouse, just as the first lightning flash caught the water in a web of white. Bradley was the first to spot the old aluminum canoe, half hidden beneath a tarp. "This is it," he said, and his voice was all bravado and midnight bravado. He hoisted the paddle, handed it to Brandon, and together they eased the boat to the edge of the dock. For a moment, Brandon looked back. The cabins glowed faintly behind a gauze of rain. Somewhere in the main lodge, a dog barked. A quick, sharp note, then fell silent. Everything else was just water and wind and their own pounding hearts. They climbed into the canoe, knees knocking. Bradley grinned through the gloom. "Told you," he said. Brandon almost smiled, but then, somewhere along the tree line, a figure moved. Just a shadow, there and gone. He shivered, thinking it must be a deer or a counselor on late patrol. The canoe drifted from the dock. The paddle dipped, sending out silent ripples that vanished before they reached the shore. Neither twin noticed the other set of footprints in the mud, or the boot prints that didn't match their own. By sunrise, the canoe was found overturned at the far end of Mirror Lake. The twins, Brandon and Bradley Cole, were gone, as if swallowed whole by the water and the dark. The lake kept its secrets, and the summer went on, but nothing at Mirror Lake Camp would ever be the same. Present day. October 2nd, 2017. Raymond Dunn woke before dawn, as he often did, the world outside his window still pressed under a lid of fog. For a moment, he let himself believe it was just another quiet Tuesday in the little house he'd chosen for its solitude, far from the city and even farther from the summers of his youth. Then he saw the postcard on the kitchen table, its corners damp from where last night's coffee cup had rested, and memory swept in like cold lake water. Come find us. 3 words, typed on an old Remington or maybe a cheap dime store typewriter, black ink that had bled slightly into the grain of the card. No return address, just a faded photograph of Mirror Lake on the front. He'd stood on that shore so many times, in every kind of weather, but the photo, gray and timeless, made it look almost haunted. He turned the card over again, rereading the message as if it might shift and spell out something less impossible. He knew who us meant, even if logic told him otherwise. 30 years had passed since that stormy night. The summer the Cole twins vanished from Mirror Lake Camp, and everything afterward became a before and after. The world had not been kind to the truth in those years. The town moved on, the camp shut down, and the stories of that night grew thinner and stranger with every telling. But for Raymond, the ache never left. He carried it in his bones, a weight that never shifted, no matter how many new lives he tried to build. He set the card down and moved through his morning by rote, shaving, brewing coffee, checking his blood pressure out of habit and guilt. The old badge he'd kept tucked in a drawer, long since retired, felt heavier in his memory than it ever had on his chest. By 8, the sun had started to eat away at the fog, and the air outside was bright with that sharp, autumnal gold. Raymond poured his coffee into a thermos and stared out the window. For the first time in years, he considered going back. His cell phone buzzed, a number he didn't recognize. He answered anyway. "This is Ray." A woman's voice, hesitant but strong. "Mr. Dunn, it's Detective Lena Sloan, Cold Cases Unit, Grafton County." His heart skipped. "Yes? I believe you were a counselor at Mirror Lake Camp in 1987. I'm reaching out about a piece of evidence that recently came to light. It seems someone mailed you a postcard connected to the Cole case." Raymond glanced at the card. He almost laughed at the absurdity of being part of an official investigation again, after all these years. "I got it yesterday. No signature, no return address. Just, come find us." There was a pause on the other end, papers rustling, the sound of a pen tapping. "We've received a similar message at the station. It's opened a few doors we thought were closed for good. Mr. Dunn, are you willing to meet? We're planning to revisit the campgrounds this week." Raymond closed his eyes and saw the lake again, silvered by stormlight. "I'll be there." He hung up and felt the quiet press in. A silence filled with old voices, old laughter, old fear. He stood for a long while, staring at the postcard, until the image of Mirror Lake seemed to ripple. Later, as he packed his battered duffel and dug out the weathered camp map he'd never quite thrown away, he called a number from a slip of paper tucked in his wallet, fingers trembling just slightly. The phone rang 3 times before a woman answered, her voice soft, guarded. "Hello? Ellie, it's Ray Dunn. Something's happened. I think it's time." A long silence, broken only by the sound of her breath. Then, "I'll meet you there." He didn't need to say where. As he locked his door and stepped out into the gold-lit morning, Raymond couldn't help but wonder if this was hope, or just another haunting. The road to Mirror Lake wound through the old pines like a memory, each curve lined with stone walls and half-collapsed barns mottled in moss. The drive from Raymond's house took just over an hour, but it felt as if time bent as he left behind the convenience stores, the chain coffee shops, and finally, the last cell signal. By the time he crested the low hill that signaled the approach to the lake, autumn sunlight had burned off the last of the morning fog, leaving the world raw and sharp. He parked at the edge of what had once been the main lot, now just a rutted expanse of gravel grown through with weeds. Across the water, the cabins sagged into the trees, their painted numbers faded to ghosts. The main lodge, visible through a stand of birch, had lost half its roof to weather and years of neglect. Even the dock, once a bright line against the water, leaned precariously, the boards warped and bleached to silver. Raymond sat in his truck for a minute, hands on the wheel. It was quieter than he remembered. No distant shouts, no laughter echoing between cabins, no tinny bell from the old camp kitchen. Just the hush of wind in the pines and the soft, irregular slap of water against the dock pilings. A door slammed somewhere behind him. Raymond turned to see a figure standing at the edge of the lot, clutching a brown satchel and a heavy jacket against the wind. Ellie Cole, older now, but unmistakable. Her hair, once bright blonde, was cut short and streaked with silver. She moved with a kind of cautious grace, the way people do after years spent expecting bad news. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ellie crossed the gravel, her boots crunching, and stopped a few feet away. "I didn't think I'd ever come back here," she said quietly, voice almost lost in the wind. Raymond nodded. "Me neither." They stood in silence, taking in the ruins of the camp. The air smelled of fallen leaves, damp earth, the faintest tinge of wood smoke from somewhere across the lake. A cottage, maybe, clinging to the last weeks before winter. Ellie broke the silence. "I heard about the postcard. I didn't want to believe it at first. Part of me still doesn't." Raymond reached into his pocket and handed her the card. She turned it over in her hands, thumb tracing the words. "Come find us," she murmured, almost to herself. "They sent one to the police, too. Detective Sloan called me this morning. She'll meet us here." Raymond looked out at the water, suddenly aware of how still it was. "Have you been back since—" She shook her head. "I tried once, right after college. Made it as far as the turnoff, then drove straight back to Boston. Couldn't do it." They started walking down the familiar trail toward the shore, feet crunching through damp needles. Each step brought back flashes, shouts at swim practice, the sweet smell of sunblock, Bradley's wild laughter, Brandon's quiet, stubborn determination. Ellie paused at the water's edge, hugging herself. "I used to watch them from here, every morning. They'd always be the first to the dock, always together." Raymond knelt, reaching into the cold shallows. His hand came back slick with mud and decayed leaves. "People say the lake never gives up its secrets." Ellie's lips tightened. "But it remembers." Behind them, another car pulled up, a silver sedan, government plates. Detective Sloan stepped out, tall and brisk, notepad already in hand. Her gaze was sharp but kind. She greeted them, her presence somehow grounding. "Mr. Dunn, Ms. Cole, I appreciate you both coming. We've reopened the file in earnest, new forensic methods, and with these postcards—" She trailed off, her eyes on the water. Ellie cleared her throat. "What do you actually hope to find?" Sloan tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her expression unreadable. "Sometimes the land keeps secrets. Sometimes people do. We follow whatever trail we have, no matter how cold." Raymond glanced at the old canoe shed, now collapsed, half hidden by wild raspberry canes. "So where do we start?" Sloan smiled, thin and determined. "With the night the twins vanished, with what you both remember, and with the camp records, if any survived." The three of them walked slowly back toward the broken lodge. The lake, behind them, shimmered, black, endless, reflecting only sky and the fading outline of two children on a distant dock, forever out of reach. The old camp office was colder than the wind outside, its windows rimed with years of dust and sap, the floor carpeted with pine needles blown in through a cracked window. Raymond paused at the threshold, breathing in the air. Wood rot, mouse droppings, the bitter tang of mildew. For a moment he saw it as it once was. Shelves lined with summer crafts, clipboards hanging in neat rows, the steady shuffle of paperwork behind the battered desk. Now, sunlight came in slantwise through the dirt, revealing sagging shelves, the collapsed husk of an office chair, and drawers hanging open like broken mouths. In the corner, the camp's ledger, a great, leather-bound book lay on its side, pages fanned and curling at the edges. Detective Sloane stepped inside first, careful where she placed her feet. "We have a warrant for anything left on the property," she said, her tone gentle. "You can help me look. Sometimes even what's left behind matters." Ellie hesitated at the door, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her gaze lingered on the walls, still faintly patterned with the yellowing tape marks where her brother's artwork once hung. Raymond bent to the ledger, flipping through brittle pages. Camp rosters, supply lists, shift schedules. His finger paused on a faded entry. July 13th, 1987, storm, power loss. Reported missing, Brandon Cole, Bradley Cole. The note was written in the familiar looping hand of the camp director, Mrs. Price, with a circle of smudged pencil around the twins' names. Ellie moved to a corner cabinet, rummaging past boxes that dissolved into pulp at her touch. Buried beneath a layer of crumpled flyers and paper cups, her hand found a blue plastic folder, the kind her mother used to keep schoolwork in. She opened it. Inside were stacks of permission slips, incident reports, and, tucked at the back, a Polaroid photograph. She held it up to the light. Two boys, arms thrown around each other's shoulders, grinning in the glow of an evening campfire. Bradley's scar glimmered above his eyebrow, and Brandon's face was solemn with the effort of not blinking at the flash. In the background, shadows twisted in the trees, half-formed, like ghosts. Raymond gently took the photo. "I remember this. It was the last night anyone saw them." Sloane was at the desk, thumbing through a water-stained box. "What about staff records? Was there anyone on shift who seemed off? Any warnings or complaints?" Ellie frowned, thinking back through years of therapy and regret. "I was 13. I thought the counselors were gods, but there was tension that summer, cliques, people sneaking out at night." Raymond nodded. "There was a boy, Billy Rausch. Got sent home early after he set off fireworks by the lake. Some staff said he came back the night the twins vanished, but nobody could prove it." Sloane made notes, her brow furrowed. "We'll need to find him. Anyone else?" Ellie shrugged, her shoulders tense. "One of the older girls, Marissa Coyle, always seemed to be fighting with the counselors. She and my brothers were close. She was like a big sister to them. But she left right after, wouldn't talk to anyone. My parents tried to reach her for years. They searched in silence for a while, sifting through the debris of decades. Raymond found an old flashlight, corroded but still holding the faint memory of a sticker in Brandon's handwriting, C-O-L-E. Ellie unearthed a faded merit badge, the threads unraveling. Sloane unearthed a water-warped notebook, its ink bled into ghostly blue lines. As they worked, the wind picked up, rattling the glass in the window. A branch scraped across the sill, drawing their attention to the pines beyond, where a faint path wound into the trees. For a heartbeat, all three listened, convinced just for a moment that they heard children's voices on the wind. Laughter, running footsteps, a shout echoing back from 30 years ago. Sloane broke the spell. "I'd like to canvass the other buildings, see if anything else survived. Miss Cole, would you come with me?" Ellie nodded, swallowing hard. "Of course." Raymond lingered in the office, the photo still in his hand. In the quiet, the pine shadows seemed to shift, never quite settling. He slipped the photograph into his pocket and stepped out into the sun. Outside, the lake lay silent, reflecting the sky like polished stone. Raymond gazed at the water and thought of secrets, of what could be hidden for so long in the deep, cold heart of Mirror Lake. Somewhere behind him, Ellie's voice called out, a little too sharp, a little too urgent. Raymond hurried to follow, the photograph burning against his chest like a talisman or a warning. Mirror Lake Camp, July 13th, 1987. The storm had broken the heat at last, but left the air heavy and restless. The lake lapped at the shore in slow, hungry rhythms, the dock creaking with each breath of wind. Cabin 7 glowed faintly under the storm lantern, its bunks tangled with discarded towels and swimsuits, the hush broken only by the quiet snores of sleeping boys. In the shadows by the window, Brandon Cole sat with his knees drawn up, shivering, not from cold, but from the wild current of nerves racing beneath his skin. Across from him, Bradley fidgeted with the flashlight, switching it off and on, casting jittery constellations across the cabin's low ceiling. They had waited until the last rounds were done, until Mrs. Price's footsteps faded into the sound of rain on the roof. The world outside was a patchwork of darkness and trembling silver, branches dripping, puddles shining in the thin moonlight that had finally broken through the clouds. Bradley's voice was barely more than a whisper. "Now or never, Bran." Brandon nodded, swallowing the pebble of fear in his throat. He glanced at the small digital watch on his wrist. The green numbers read 12:27 a.m. He thought of his sister, Ellie, asleep in cabin 4 across the field. He wished he could tell her where they were going, but he'd promised Bradley, and breaking a twin's promise was unthinkable. With practiced care, the boys eased open the cabin window. They had done it twice before on dares, but tonight every sound felt louder, more permanent. Their sneakers made soft imprints in the muddy earth as they slid into the night. The camp was different after midnight. The archery range loomed like a skeleton. The swings creaked in the wind, and the old canoe shed looked impossibly far away. They moved in silence, muscles tight, hearts thumping in wild harmony. Every so often Bradley would grin. He was always the one to turn fear into adventure. Brandon just kept going, following the path through the trees until the dock appeared, gleaming and slick. Rain stung their faces as they dragged the old aluminum canoe from under its tarp, paddles clattering softly. Bradley whispered, "Fastest across the lake wins. Loser has to eat Miss Nora's oatmeal tomorrow." Brandon rolled his eyes, nerves and affection tangled together. No cheating. A flash of lightning split the sky. For a heartbeat, the whole world was white. And in that instant, Brandon thought he saw someone watching from the tree line. He blinked, and the vision was gone, replaced by the thunder's low growl and the hiss of wind. He shook it off. Just nerves, he told himself. They shoved the canoe into the water, each taking a paddle. Brandon settled at the bow, Bradley at the stern. The first push from shore was awkward, the canoe rocking dangerously before they found their balance. Rain beat against the aluminum. Brandon's hands ached from gripping the paddle, but the fear faded, replaced by the strange exhilaration of doing something forbidden. Halfway to the other shore, the lake widened and the trees vanished into mist. Bradley's laugh echoed, reckless and bright. "You're slow, Bran," Brandon answered with a splash, soaking them both. They were still arguing about who would reach the far shore first when a cold gust of wind spun the canoe sideways. "Hold on," Bradley shouted. The boat rocked, then steadied. For a moment, all Brandon could hear was his own breath and the drip of water off the paddle. That was when he noticed the second canoe, shadowy and silent, gliding out from the reeds along the north bank. "Brad?" he whispered. But Bradley had seen it too. Two figures huddled low, faces impossible to see. The twins froze, paddles poised. The other canoe moved without sound, cutting through the water like a knife. Suddenly, a beam of light swept the surface, a counselor's lantern from the dock, searching for shadows. The strange canoe veered away, vanishing into darkness. Bradley found his voice. "Who was that?" Brandon shook his head, throat tight. "Let's go back." But as they turned, a bolt of lightning lit up the water once more. For the briefest moment, Brandon saw a face, older, familiar, twisted with fear or anger or something else. Then it was gone. The storm roared louder, wind clawing at the lake. The canoe rocked violently as they struggled to turn it. Brandon lost his grip on the paddle, and it tumbled into the black water. "Bran!" Bradley yelled, reaching for him. The next moment, the world turned sideways. The canoe tipped, first slow, then sudden, throwing both boys into the freezing dark. Brandon surfaced, sputtering, grabbing at the hull. He could see Bradley, just out of reach, eyes wide with shock. Another flash of light, another shadow moving on shore. He tried to shout, but the wind stole the sound from his mouth. The last thing Brandon saw before the world closed in was his brother's hand reaching for his, and the faint, impossible glow of two lanterns, one red, one white, bobbing in the distance, calling them deeper into the night. By morning, the only evidence of their adventure was the overturned canoe, half submerged at the far end of Mirror Lake, and two sets of footprints, already blurred by rain. The twins were gone, and the storm carried their secret away into the pines. Present day. Detective Sloan stood at the center of the old mess hall, arms folded against the chill. The floor was warped with age, buckling where the roof had leaked, and every footstep set the dust dancing in slow spirals. Sunlight pushed through the broken windows, throwing patterns across abandoned bunks and the long, empty tables where generations of campers had whispered secrets and dares. Now, it was just Raymond, Ellie, and the echo of 100 lost summers. Raymond lifted the old photograph, turning it in his hands. "The last night," he murmured. "You'd think there'd be more. Something." Ellie nodded, tracing the edge of the photo. "I remember how the counselors would sit at the far table, whispering after lights out. The older kids always talked about the midnight pact, some game for the staff, never for us." Sloan looked up, curiosity sharpening her expression. "Midnight pact?" Ellie shrugged, her mouth tight. "It was an initiation thing, I think. Something only the staff did. Out on the dock, after the last cabin check. I heard them once, arguing about who had to prove themselves. I thought it was just talk. But that summer, things felt off. There were fights, kids sneaking out, the counselors acting strange, edgy, like they were all keeping the same bad secret." Raymond moved to the bulletin board, still papered with a few faded flyers. Safety rules, a list of allergies, a crude, hand-drawn treasure map. "I always wondered about the other counselors that year. We lost 2 halfway through. One, Derek Michaels, was sent home after an accident. The other, Marissa Coyle, just disappeared. I never saw her again." Sloan made a note. "We'll track them both down. If there was a pact, or some ritual, maybe someone regretted what happened." Ellie's gaze drifted out the window, toward the glint of lake between the trees. "My brothers." Brandon was cautious, but Bradley would do anything on a dare. He wanted to fit in with the older kids, to be seen. I remember one night Bradley told me he'd been invited to a special club by some of the counselors. He was so proud, but then, nothing. He never mentioned it again. Raymond stiffened. "Did you tell anyone that back then?" Ellie shook her head. "I thought it was just stories. Kids at camp always say stuff like that, right? You don't think it's real until—" Her voice trailed off, the weight of regret plain. A silence settled, heavy with things left unsaid. Sloan crossed to the table, laying out the artifacts they'd gathered. The photograph, Brandon's old flashlight, the notebook with its water-warped pages. She spoke quietly. "Sometimes kids keep secrets for each other or for adults they trust. Sometimes those secrets become walls." Raymond nodded. "I remember that year. After the twins vanished, everyone clammed up, even the adults. Mrs. Price said we weren't supposed to speculate, that the boys would turn up. There was a rumor that the midnight pact had gone wrong." Ellie closed her eyes. "If my brothers were caught up in something the counselors started, some ritual, some dare, I need to know, even now." Sloan gathered the evidence. We'll interview the old staff. Anyone still living nearby. I'll see if the sheriff's office has records, incident reports, complaints. I'll also check for Marissa Coyle and Derek Michaels. If they're alive, we'll find them. She looked at Raymond and Ellie, her voice gentle. We're not done yet. And if someone's been carrying this guilt all these years, maybe now they'll finally talk. Outside, the pines whispered in the wind, and the lake caught a sudden flash of sun, a brief, silvery glimmer, gone as quickly as it appeared. The past was still here, hiding just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to come clear. And somewhere, Raymond knew, the truth was waiting, carried like a secret code in the heartbeats of everyone who had survived that fateful summer. Detective Lena Sloan moved methodically, scanning the shoreline where the dock met the muddy earth. 30 years of weather had warped the planks, but the supports remained, old timbers stained black, reaching into the lake like searching fingers. She knelt, gloved hands sifting through pebbles, bottle caps, and pine needles. A sharp wind picked up, tugging loose hair across her face. Ellie watched from the gravel path, arms folded, her breath clouding in the cool air. Raymond stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets, gaze fixed on the water. He looked as if he expected something to surface, a memory, a clue, maybe even the twins themselves, unchanged and laughing. Lena rose, brushing grit from her knees. According to the initial case file, the canoe was found overturned here. Life jackets and a paddle washed up nearby. But no sign of the boys, and the footprints on the dock. The rain had already blurred them by dawn. Raymond nodded, his voice low. I remember. The lake was higher that year. Everything was half flooded after the storms. Ellie closed her eyes. I remember my mother standing right here, screaming their names. The wind rattled the reeds. For a moment, none of them spoke. Lena pulled a battered police folder from her satchel. We've started digitizing the original files, but the physical evidence was scattered. A few items were lost, some never logged properly. She turned a page. There were rumors, other campers hearing voices, seeing lights on the water, someone running through the trees. Raymond grimaced. The counselors told us it was nerves, ghost stories. Ellie took a shaky breath. But there were stories, even before my brothers disappeared. About the lake, about kids sneaking out, getting initiated, coming back. Different. Lena studied the water, her face unreadable. I've requested a new dive team to search beneath the dock and around the reeds. If anything was missed, if anything drifted and settled in the silt, we might find it now. Raymond kicked at a half-buried dock cleat, rust flaking off in his hand. I always wondered if the lake was hiding something. It never felt empty, not really. Like it remembered. Ellie turned toward the woods, scanning the twisted path back to camp. Maybe someone does remember. If the pact was real, if there was an initiation that night, someone's been living with that secret a long time. Lena closed the folder, tucking it away. This is a small town. Secrets fester here. But with the case reopened, I've started re-interviewing anyone who worked or attended camp that summer. Some are still around. Some moved away, changed their names, tried to start over. I'll find them. A car crunched up the gravel road behind them. Lena glanced back. That's the sheriff's office. They'll help us cordon off the site for the divers. Why don't you both walk the grounds again, see if anything jogs your memory? Sometimes being back where it happened, things come loose. Ellie nodded, and she and Raymond wandered along the shoreline, boots squelching in wet moss. The water reflected the sky, endless and cold. As they passed the old canoe shed, Ellie paused, tracing her fingers over the weathered wood. She remembered her brothers, Bradley's mischievous grin, Brandon's quiet courage, the way they never let each other out of sight. Raymond joined her. We'll find out what happened, he said softly. We have to. Ellie's eyes stung. I just want to bring them home. A gull screamed overhead, startled by the movement on shore. In the stillness that followed, Raymond felt something shift inside him, a small, stubborn hope that after all these years, Mirror Lake might finally give up its secrets. Behind them, Detective Sloane conferred with the deputies, her silhouette framed by the restless water and the sky that promised rain. The lake waited, patient and silent, as it always had. Ellie hadn't planned to linger by the canoe shed, but standing in its shadow, the details came rushing back. Splinters beneath her hands, the low drone of mosquitoes, the hush of midnight water. She closed her eyes and was 13 again, sleepless, counting the seconds between distant thunder and the soft hush of her brother's voices through Cabin 7's thin walls. Raymond waited beside her, silent but present. His gaze moved over the ruin of the shed, the broken canoes stacked like bones, the dock that sagged toward the water as if exhausted by all it had carried. Ellie finally spoke, voice barely more than a breath. "There was something that last afternoon. Bradley and Brandon had a fight, rare, but it happened. I heard Bradley say, 'You'll chicken out anyway.' Brandon said, 'Not this time.' I thought they were arguing about who'd take the deep-end swim test. Now I wonder." Raymond nodded, his eyes far away. "Kids fight, but sometimes a fight is a cover for something bigger." Ellie hugged her arms tighter. "I remember Marissa Coyle watching them that night at dinner. She was a counselor, but she always looked out for the younger kids. After my brothers disappeared, she left camp. No goodbye, nothing." Raymond frowned. Marissa was different. Braver, maybe. She stood up to the older counselors. If anyone knew what was going on with the pacts, it was her. Ellie looked at him. "Do you think the pact, whatever it was, could have gone wrong that night?" He hesitated, then nodded. If the twins were trying to prove themselves, if someone dared them to cross the lake or meet at the dock after dark, it might have been part of the initiation. I remember the stories. A test of courage, but nothing ever went wrong until that summer. Ellie's eyes brimmed with memory and something like regret. "I never told anyone about the fight or about what Bradley said. I thought if I stayed quiet, the bad feeling would go away. Instead, it got worse. It grew." The silence between them grew thick. Behind the clouds, sunlight flickered, a pulse of gold across the lake's black surface. Raymond's voice was gentle. "Ellie, do you remember anything else? Even something small?" She searched her memory, fragments swirling. Marissa's warning look at the mess hall, the way one of the older boys, Derek, would linger by the boathouse, the way the staff sometimes whispered at the edge of the woods, glancing over their shoulders as if afraid of being overheard. "There was a rumor," she said at last, "that some of the counselors used to meet at the North Point after dark. Sometimes they took the younger campers with them for bravery trials. Dares mostly. Swim to the old log, touch the third buoy. Silly stuff. But that summer, it felt meaner. Like someone was pushing things too far." Raymond filed the names away. Marissa, Derek, the North Point. Every detail another thread in a tangle that had waited 30 years to unravel. Ellie wiped her eyes and turned back toward the lodge, where Detective Sloane stood waiting, conferring with a deputy. "If Marissa's out there, I want to find her. I need to know what she saw that night." Raymond nodded, hope flickering. "We will. Maybe she's been waiting for someone to ask." The wind picked up, rattling the reeds and sending ripples across the lake. Somewhere across the water, a loon called, a mournful sound, ancient and lonely. Ellie listened, a shiver running through her. "Sometimes I think the lake remembers more than any of us." Raymond squeezed her shoulder. "Let's see what Sloane's found." Together they walked back toward the past, ready, at last, to let the memories rise. Detective Sloane set up a temporary workspace at one end of the mess hall, stacking found files, recovered camp records, and water-warped notebooks in neat piles. As the afternoon light shifted through the broken windows, Ellie sat at one of the benches, combing through a battered cardboard box marked Summer '87 Personal in faded marker. Most of it was junk. Old nature guides, broken pencils, a trophy for second place in the talent show. But beneath a tangle of dried-out friendship bracelets, her fingers brushed a spiral-bound notebook. She pulled it free, heart pounding, and stared at the cover. Raymond Dunn, Cabin 5, written in the awkward print of a teenage boy. Raymond looked over, startled. "I thought I lost that after the storm." Ellie handed it to him, and he sat, turning the pages slowly. The paper had gone soft at the corners, some ink smudged beyond reading, but bits of his old life surfaced. Rosters, sketches of the cabins, cryptic maps of the lake, song lyrics, a log of fish caught and pranks played. Sloane watched as Raymond's face tightened, then stilled. "Anything important?" Raymond didn't answer at first. He flipped to a page marked with a red paperclip, one he had no memory of placing. There, in his own slanted writing, was a list of dates and names. July 10th, Derek, midnight swim. July 11th. Marissa, refused, argued with Mrs. Price. July 12th, Brandon and Bradley, invited, North Point. July 13th. Final night, he read aloud, voice growing soft. "Looks like I was keeping track of who did what at night. I must have been trying to prove, I don't know, that I belonged, or just to remember. I wrote, final night." Ellie's breath caught. That was the night my brothers disappeared. Raymond kept turning. Tucked in the back pocket of the journal was a folded, stained scrap. Half a note, written in a rush. "Meet us at the North Point after lights out. Don't tell anyone. It's for the pact. D." Sloane leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Derek, we need to find him." Raymond felt a chill crawl up his spine. "I barely remember him. Older, always dared the others, acted tough. He and Marissa argued all summer." Ellie studied the note, knuckles white. "My brothers got this, didn't they?" "They must have, if the pact was real and Derek wanted them at the North Point." Raymond paged further, scanning for clues. One entry, written in the dazed scrawl of exhaustion, stood out. "Heard shouting by the dock. Saw lanterns, one red, one white. Couldn't sleep. Marissa came in late, soaked, told me to forget what I saw. Wish I could." He put the journal down, hands trembling. "I saw something. I must have. But I told myself it was just a dream. 30 years of pretending it was nothing." Sloane reached for her notepad. "We'll run Derek's name, see if we can track him, and Marissa too. Maybe this is what broke her silence." Ellie's eyes shone with fierce hope and grief. "If we find them, if we find out what happened that night, maybe my brothers can finally come home." Sloane nodded, her tone gentle but determined. "We're getting closer. Sometimes the smallest thing is what opens the door." Outside, thunder rumbled far away. Raymond stared at his old handwriting, the lines blurring with memory, and realized that the past was not as distant as he'd hoped. The secrets of Mirror Lake, long buried, were beginning to rise. By the next morning, Mirror Lake was still as glass, the clouds low and gray, muting the world to a hush. Ellie watched from the dock, arms wrapped tight around herself, as the sheriff's dive team prepared their gear. Deputy Martin gave a reassuring nod as he fitted his mask and checked his oxygen tank, but Ellie barely registered it. All she could see was the expanse of water, endless and inscrutable. Raymond stood beside her, silent, gripping the railing. Detective Sloane paced the shoreline with her phone, updating someone at the lab about the journal entries and the note found the day before. The divers slipped into the lake, bubbles breaking the surface, their flashlights sending pale beams into the silt. For long minutes, there was only the faint hum of their air tanks and the distant caw of crows in the trees. Ellie's thoughts turned in tight, relentless circles. Her brothers' faces, laughter echoing through camp, the fragments of that last day. Brandon's nervous smile, Bradley's daredevil wink. Had they been scared, or did they think it was all a game? A shout from the water snapped her back. One of the divers surfaced, waving for the others. The team gathered, voices low, and then Deputy Martin swam toward shore, something clutched in his hand. Sloane met him at the edge. Martin held up a small, rusted padlock, thick with silt but still faintly engraved. Mirror Lake Camp. Next to it, in a mesh bag, was an old flashlight, yellow, cracked but unmistakable. Ellie stepped forward, heart in her throat. She knelt in the mud, staring at the flashlight. The faded sticker, smudged but legible. C-O-L-E. Raymond placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. That was Brandon's. He'd won it for being the first to spot a loon on the lake. He never let it out of his sight. Martin's voice was soft. We found these wedged between the rocks near the collapsed north dock. There's more silt to search. We'll go back in. Detective Sloane took photos, bagged the finds, and handed the padlock to Raymond. Was this part of the midnight pact? Raymond nodded. The counselors locked the paddles in the shed every night. Only staff had keys. If the twins had a lock, someone trusted them, or wanted to make them think they belonged. Ellie pressed the flashlight to her chest, tears streaking her cheeks. If only they'd come back to the cabin. If only someone had listened. As the divers re-entered the lake, Raymond and Ellie wandered the shoreline, searching for anything that might have been missed. A scrap of cloth, a shoe, a hint of what happened when the world went dark. Mid-morning became afternoon. The dive team surfaced again, this time with a child's friendship bracelet, beads faded and broken, the letters barely visible. B and B. 1987. Ellie let out a sob, clutching it tight. Bradley made this for Brandon. They never took it off. Sloane's eyes were gentle but determined. These things survived all these years. There may be more. We'll keep searching. Raymond stared out at the gray lake, its secret stirred but not yet revealed. I always wondered if the truth was down there waiting. Now I know. It's rising, one piece at a time. The sun tried to break through, glinting off the water. For the first time in decades, hope flickered at the water's edge. Small and fragile, but alive. Behind them, the woods rustled with the sound of approaching footsteps. A deputy called out, "Detective Sloane, you've got a visitor at the gate." Says her name is Marissa Coyle Ellie, and Raymond turned, hearts racing. Maybe the answers weren't just beneath the water. Maybe they were finally coming ashore. The mess hall felt different now, electric with possibility. Anxiety humming just beneath the surface. Marissa Coyle stood near the door, her hair streaked with gray and her eyes wary but clear. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder at the lake as if unsure she'd made the right decision coming back. Detective Sloane greeted her with a quiet professionalism, inviting her to sit at one of the battered tables where the evidence was laid out. The old flashlight, the padlock, the bracelet. Raymond and Ellie watched in tense silence, their memories and hopes colliding in the small space between breaths. Marissa's voice was low but steady. I haven't spoken about that summer in decades. I left right after. I couldn't stay. I kept waiting for someone to come ask what I knew. No one ever did. Sloane slid the evidence forward, gentle but insistent. We're asking now. We need to know about the midnight pact, the counselors, and what happened the night Brandon and Bradley disappeared. Marissa pressed her palms flat to the table, as if bracing herself against the past. The pact was real. Started out as dares, harmless at first. Night swims, sneaking out for s'mores. But that year, Derek pushed it too far. He wanted to scare the younger kids, prove he was in charge. Ellie leaned in. Did my brothers know about it? Marissa nodded. They were desperate to fit in, especially Bradley. Derek singled them out for the final night, said if they could make it to the North Dock after lights out and bring back the paddle, they'd be legends. Raymond's stomach turned. Were you there that night? Marissa's hands trembled. I tried to stop them. I argued with Derek, but he wouldn't listen. I saw the twins slip out of cabin 7, so I followed. The storm was coming in. The air felt wrong. She paused, fighting the tremor in her voice. I saw them get to the boathouse. Derek and another counselor, Lisa, were already waiting with a canoe, daring them on. I yelled at Derek, told him it was too dangerous. He laughed. The twins looked scared, but Bradley put on a brave face for Brandon. Ellie swallowed hard. What happened next? Marissa stared at her hands. They both climbed into the canoe. Derek and Lisa took another and paddled after them, laughing, shining their lanterns on the water. I saw Brandon lose his paddle, heard the splash. The storm hit hard, wind everywhere. The last thing I saw was both canoes drifting toward the North Point. Then the rain came down so heavy, I lost sight of everything. Sloane's voice was gentle. Did you see Derek or Lisa after that? Marissa nodded, eyes shining. They came back, soaked, panicked, but with no sign of the boys. Lisa was crying. Derek told us to keep quiet, said it was an accident, that the boys must have gotten lost in the storm. Mrs. Price believed him. The rest of us? We just shut down. No one wanted to believe what had happened. I quit the next day. I couldn't face the lies. Raymond let out a shaky breath. You were just a kid yourself. Marissa looked at Ellie, guilt etched deep in every line of her face. I'm so sorry. I should have done more. I should have told the truth. Ellie reached across the table, squeezing her hand. Thank you for coming back. We just want to bring them home. Sloane nodded. You've given us enough to reopen the case as an endangerment and likely wrongful death. We'll question Derek and Lisa and compare their statements. Marissa, if you're willing, I'll ask you to make a formal statement. Marissa nodded, wiping her eyes. Whatever it takes. Outside, thunder rolled over the lake, echoing like a drumbeat from another life. Raymond looked at the water, at the battered evidence on the table, at the faces gathered in the pale light. It felt, for the first time, like the story was being told the way it should have been all along, not as a legend, but as the truth. In the distance, the afternoon faded into a restless dusk, the campfire stories finally giving way to answers. Detective Sloane didn't waste a moment. With Marissa's statement in hand and the recovered evidence cataloged, she called the station. Within an hour, deputies brought Derek Michaels in for questioning. Lisa, the other counselor from that summer, was located at a nearby hospital where she now worked as a nurse. She agreed to speak with Sloane the next morning. Ellie and Raymond waited in the mess hall, tension mounting. Night pressed in at the windows, the sound of rain blurring the outlines of the world beyond. Marissa, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee, seemed at once lighter, relieved to have finally spoken, and haunted by what she'd set in motion. Detective Sloane returned after a long while, her raincoat streaked with water. She dropped her notepad on the table, exhaustion clear in the lines of her face. Derek tried to stick to his old story at first, she said. Claimed he barely knew the twins, that they just disappeared. But when we presented Marissa's testimony and the evidence from the lake, he started to crack. Ellie stared at her. Did he admit it? Sloane nodded grimly. He said he was showing off for the others. The midnight pact was always meant to be a joke, but that night he wanted to scare your brothers. He and Lisa took their canoe and circled the twins, splashing, laughing, shining their lanterns. He admitted Bradley and Brandon panicked when the storm hit and lost a paddle. The canoes collided and tipped. Derek said he saw the twins clinging to the hull, calling for help, but he panicked. He didn't try to pull them into his boat. He just left them. Marissa covered her mouth, tears spilling over. Raymond's voice was low and tight. So he abandoned them. Sloane nodded. Lisa tried to help, but the wind was too strong. By the time they got back to shore, they couldn't see the twins. Derek convinced her not to tell anyone. Said they'd get blamed, that no one would believe it was an accident. They left the overturned canoe where it was and snuck back to camp, soaked and terrified. Ellie's fists clenched, knuckles white. All this time, he just let them disappear? Sloane's tone softened. They were kids themselves, but that doesn't excuse it. Derek said he never forgave himself. Lisa left the state for years, trying to start over. Raymond stared at the rain-smeared window, the darkness pressing close. The whole camp closed ranks around the lie. Sloane nodded. Mrs. Price wanted to protect the camp's reputation. She filed incomplete reports, discouraged rumors. Any staff who questioned the story was quietly let go. Ellie's voice was raw. And all that time, my brothers were at the bottom of the lake. Sloane reached across the table, squeezing her hand. We've got probable cause for a full search of the lake bed. We'll bring in cadaver dogs, sonar. The truth is coming out now, and everyone responsible, everyone who kept that secret, will be held accountable. Marissa wiped her eyes. I should have told someone. I'm so sorry. Ellie shook her head, her tears mingling with the rain outside. You did now. You came back. That's what matters. Sloane gathered her files. We'll keep you updated. It's not over yet. But you're not alone in this anymore. The three of them sat in silence, listening to the lake's eternal hush. Outside, the rain slackened, and somewhere in the distance, the first hopeful call of a loon echoed across the water. For the first time, the pact had broken, not in secrecy, but in truth. The morning brought a stillness to Mirror Lake that felt almost reverent, as if the water itself was waiting for what would come next. A low mist hugged the shoreline. Deputies set up a perimeter, and the new search team, this time with sonar, cadaver dogs, and forensic divers, gathered at the dock. The entire camp felt suspended, a town's worth of eyes watching from the pines. Ellie stood with Raymond and Marissa, arms looped for support. Detective Sloane briefed the team, her tone steady. We're focusing on the north dock and the deeper water nearby. That's where evidence suggests the canoe capsized and where the padlock and flashlight were found. The divers moved with practiced precision, slipping beneath the surface in pairs. Sonar scanned the lake bed, beams painting the silt and sunken timbers with pale light. Deputies walked the shore with the dogs, methodically checking for remains. Raymond turned to Sloane, voice rough. How long will it take? Sloane glanced at her watch. As long as we need. We've also reopened inquiries about other disappearances connected to former staff from that summer. Derek, Lisa, and anyone else mentioned in your journal, Ray. There's a pattern of questionable behavior that might stretch beyond Mirror Lake. Marissa shuddered. You think they hurt other kids? Sloane's jaw tightened. We don't know yet. But someone sent the postcards to Ray and the police. Someone who wanted this secret brought to light. It could be a former camper or a staff member with a guilty conscience. We're tracing the postmark. Ellie stared at the lake, eyes burning. All this time, the water kept the truth. The search went on, hours marked by the low whir of equipment and the soft splash of paddles. Midday, a deputy approached, holding a mesh bag containing a handful of small, rusted objects. A locket, a watch, another child's bracelet, a patch from Cabin 7. Each artifact was tagged and carefully recorded, fragments of lives interrupted by a storm decades before. Raymond opened his journal, thumbing through the old entries. The handwriting on the postcards. Can we compare it to the campers or counselors from that year? Sloane nodded. We're working on it. One former camper, Jacob Morgan, was known for writing notes and codes. He moved away after the twins vanished, but I've got a call into him. If it was him, he may finally be ready to tell us what he saw. Marissa's voice trembled. I hope he does. I hope someone finally speaks up. A radio crackled. One of the divers had surfaced by the north dock, waving for the team. The mood shifted. Tense, breathless. The divers brought up a bundle wrapped in rotted canvas, handled with the utmost care. Ellie's world narrowed to that moment, her heart pounding, Raymond gripping her hand. Sloane moved to intercept the bundle, her face grave. Inside, beneath layers of silt and time, were scraps of clothing, twin-sized green and blue, and small bones tangled with the beads of a broken friendship bracelet. For a long moment, no one spoke. The truth was here, undeniable and gentle in its heartbreak. The past, finally, was rising to the surface. Detective Sloane turned to Ellie and Raymond, her eyes shining with compassion. "We'll send these for DNA testing, but I'm so sorry. I believe we found them." Tears spilled down Ellie's cheeks as she whispered her brothers' names to the water, the names the lake had held in silence for 30 years. The echoes of that long-ago night shimmered in the mist. No longer secret, no longer lost. The afternoon sun was slanting through the pines when Detective Sloane returned from the forensic tent, her steps careful, her face composed but heavy with the weight of what she had to say. Ellie and Raymond sat on a weathered bench overlooking the lake, Marissa at their side, all three silent, grieving, grateful, exhausted. The search had ended. The remains, now officially confirmed as the Cole twins through dental records and DNA, had been transferred to the state lab for final confirmation. There was a kind of closure, but the ache was bottomless. Sloane sat beside them, offering a tired smile. "It's over," she said quietly. "The remains will be released for burial after the final review. You did right by your brothers, Ellie. By coming back, by asking the questions nobody else would." Ellie nodded, her hands shaking. "I still can't believe it's real. All those years I pictured them somewhere, alive, lost, grown up and waiting. But it was always here. They never left." Raymond squeezed her hand. "We tried, Elle. We tried to remember, tried to move on. I don't know if any of us ever really did." As they sat in the hush, Sloane's phone vibrated with a new message. She scanned it, eyebrows rising. "That was the cold case unit. They've tracked down Jacob Morgan, the boy who always wrote notes, who was there that summer. He's agreed to come in. He says he saw something that night, something he never told anyone." Ellie's breath caught. "He was in cabin 7 too. He would have seen them leave." Within the hour, Jacob arrived, thinner and older than the boy in their memories, but with the same nervous energy. He sat down, eyes flicking between them, hands twisting in his lap. "I've kept this for 30 years, he said, voice rough. "I never told because Derek scared me. He said something bad would happen if we talked." He glanced at Ellie. "But I saw your brothers leave. I watched them meet Derek and Lisa at the dock. Bradley looked scared, but he went anyway. I saw the canoes go out. I thought it was just a game." Jacob's eyes shimmered with guilt. "But then the storm came in. I watched from my window. I saw Derek and Lisa come back alone. I heard them arguing. Lisa crying, Derek saying to keep quiet. Later that night, Marissa came into our cabin. She sat with me until I fell asleep. She never said a word." Raymond's voice was gentle. "Why now, Jacob?" Jacob swallowed. "I got the postcard too, the one that said, 'Come find us.' I figured if you all were coming back, if someone finally cared to ask, I had to tell what I saw. I owed it to the twins. I owed it to you." Tears slipped down Ellie's cheeks, but her voice was steady. "Thank you, Jacob. It wasn't your fault. You were a child too." Sloane leaned forward, her expression warm. "Your testimony helps. It confirms what happened. The camp, Derek, Lisa, they all let a tragedy become a secret. But now, finally, the truth is out." Jacob nodded, relief mingling with grief. "Maybe now I can let them go. Maybe we all can." Outside, the lake was calm and glassy, reflecting the gathering dusk in the faces of those who remained. The past, at last, was no longer a story whispered in fear. but a truth spoken aloud. As Jacob stood to leave, he pressed a folded paper into Ellie's hand. "A map," he said, smiling shyly, "of the camp. I made it that summer. I drew in all the places your brothers loved. Maybe it'll help you remember them the way they were, brave and kind and always together." Ellie hugged him. "Thank you. I'll treasure it. We all will." The final witness had spoken. The circle was closing, and the story, after all these years, was finally whole. A week later, the sky over Mirror Lake was washed clean and blue, autumn's gold settling in the trees. The air had that crisp, bittersweet clarity that makes you notice every small thing. The ripple of water, the crackle of leaves underfoot, the way the wind carries both endings and beginnings. Ellie and Raymond returned to the camp with Marissa, Detective Sloan, and a handful of townspeople who'd come to pay respects and bear witness to what had been found and what had been lost. The remains of Brandon and Bradley Cole were brought home at last, 2 small caskets laid side by side beneath the pines. Ellie stood with her hand on each, her voice sure and calm as she spoke to the gathered crowd. "We searched for answers for so long, afraid to believe in hope, afraid to let it go. For 30 years, Mirror Lake kept its secret. But love waited too. My brothers deserve to come home, and today, finally, they have." Raymond stood beside her, eyes bright with tears. "None of us were ever the same after that night. But in facing the past, we learned the truth is better than any story told in the dark. The truth is what sets us free." Marissa read a poem she'd written for the twins as a girl. The words trembled but held strong, carrying her apology and her love out across the water, where a pair of loons drifted, calling softly to each other. Detective Sloan spoke last. "This camp was built on trust, on the promise that children would be safe here. For a time, that promise was broken, but the courage of those who returned, and those who never left, reminds us that we are stronger when we choose honesty over silence and compassion over fear." As the ceremony ended, Ellie walked down to the water's edge. She knelt, setting the faded flashlight and friendship bracelet, recovered from the lake, on the surface, letting them float away. The items drifted out, bobbing gently, until they vanished into the autumn sun's reflection. Beside her, Raymond unfolded Jacob's childhood map. He traced the paths, the hidden shortcuts, the secret meeting spots. He saw, for the first time in decades, the world as the Cole twins had seen it, alive, full of adventure, every shadow holding promise rather than fear. Marissa joined them, her hand resting gently on Ellie's shoulder. "You brought them home," she whispered, "and you gave us all a chance to start again." As dusk fell, the group lingered, no one in a hurry to leave. There were old campfire stories shared in gentle voices, laughter that rang clean through the trees, and tears that no longer belonged only to the past. That night, for the first time in 30 years, the pines of Mirror Lake stood as silent witnesses not to tragedy, but to healing. The lake, still and deep, reflected not loss, but reunion. And for the Cole family, the long journey home was finally at an end. The world turned quietly, as it always did. But something in the air around Mirror Lake had changed. Ellie lingered after the others had gone, standing alone beneath the trees with the camp silent behind her. She breathed in the scent of pine and cool water, the fading warmth of autumn sun on her face. For the first time in years, she felt the absence of dread, a softness in her chest where the old ache had lived. Raymond joined her, his steps careful on the carpet of leaves. He carried a worn journal and Jacob's hand-drawn map, both pressed to his heart like relics. They didn't speak for a while, simply listening to the hush of the woods and the soft ripple of the lake. "I always thought the story would end with answers," Ellie said quietly. "But all we really wanted was to bring them home." Raymond nodded, his voice thick with emotion. Some stories don't end, Elle. They just change. You'll see them everywhere now. Their laughter in the wind, their courage in your heart. She smiled through tears, remembering 2 boys in the summer light. One bold, one careful, both forever 11. We lost so much, Ray, but we still have each other. The wind sent a hush through the pines, a gentle listening sound. From across the lake came the distant echo of a loon, carrying their names into the deepening dusk. Down by the water, Detective Sloan walked the shoreline, collecting stray evidence markers left by her team. She looked up and waved, a promise that justice had been served as far as it could, that the truth had been honored, even if it came too late to save 2 boys. Ellie watched her, then knelt at the water's edge. She cupped a handful of cold, clear lake water, letting it trickle through her fingers. A farewell, a blessing. She whispered a quiet prayer, not for answers, but for peace. As the sky deepened, stars blinked on overhead. The camp, ruined and reclaimed by the wild, seemed smaller now, the woods less haunted. Ellie knew she would carry this place with her always, the sorrow and the beauty, the questions and the grace of their return. She turned to Raymond and smiled. "Let's go home." Hand in hand, they left the shore. The lake behind them finally stilled. In the hush that followed, Mirror Lake held their story gently, its secrets spoken, its silence now a song of memory and love. And somewhere, beneath the calm surface, the water reflected not only loss, but a family made whole again.